Hello everyone, welcome to Tesla Daily News. Today is July 26th, Sunday, and the following is the latest Tesla news. According to the Kansas City Star, republished via TheStreet, there is a growing contrast between the safety records of different autonomous driving players, with Waymo appearing to pull ahead of Tesla in the data debate. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, or IIHS, has released a detailed study on Waymo's fully driverless operations in cities such as San Francisco, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and Austin. Based on crash reports from 2021 to 2024, the institute found that Waymo's driverless vehicles were involved in nearly 70% fewer crashes per mile than human drivers. In some cities, the estimated reduction in crashes was even higher, especially for single-vehicle accidents and injury crashes. The same report notes an important limitation. U.S. regulators currently do not require autonomous vehicle operators to disclose consistent data on how many miles they drive and under what conditions. Waymo voluntarily shares mileage figures, which allows at least a partial apples-to-apples comparison with human drivers. Most competitors, including Tesla, do not provide that same level of transparent mileage and operating mode data, meaning regulators and independent analysts cannot fully compare safety outcomes across different autonomous systems. The article highlights that Waymo's own internal, peer-reviewed analysis of over 56 million fully autonomous miles shows a roughly 79% reduction in injury crashes compared with human driving. The new IIHS study broadly validates these internal claims, strengthening Waymo's credibility with regulators, the public, and investors. For Tesla investors and enthusiasts, this is important context. The benchmark for autonomous safety is not just human drivers anymore. It is also other autonomous fleets that are willing to open their data to scrutiny. In sharp contrast, the Kansas City report points out that Tesla's full self-driving program is coming under heightened political and regulatory pressure. According to the article, U.S. Senators Edward Markey and Richard Blumenthal have sent a formal letter to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the NHTSA, accusing Tesla of using weak and potentially misleading methods to justify its bold claims that full self-driving is up to 10 times safer than a human driver. The senators reference a Reuters investigation that described Tesla's reliance on internal data labelers and questioned the robustness of the company's safety analysis. According to this letter cited by the Kansas City Star, Tesla's comparisons are problematic in several key ways. First, Tesla is accused of comparing different types of crash outcomes in a way that makes the company's technology look safer than it actually is. For example, Tesla's own statistics may compare newer Tesla vehicles equipped with the latest safety and driver assist hardware to the entire U.S. vehicle fleet, which includes many older, less safe cars. That alone can create a flattering comparison that is not purely about software performance. Second, the senators argue that Tesla's method for counting when full self-driving was active during a crash is looser than federal standards, but in a way that favors Tesla. Tesla tends to define an FSD-involved crash as one where the system was active at the moment of impact or within roughly 5 seconds. By contrast, the NHTSA uses a 30-second window for all advanced driver assistance systems. This narrower Tesla window can exclude crashes where FSD may still have influenced vehicle behavior shortly before the collision, making the system appear safer than it might truly be. Third, the letter criticizes Tesla for relying on incomplete telemetry data. Not every minor crash or near miss is captured or shared in a transparent way, according to the senators' concerns. At the same time, human drivers are not required to report many minor incidents, so comparing human crash rates to a filtered subset of Tesla incidents is tricky at best. The key message is that the current data regime allows companies to present a curated picture of their safety performance, and the senators argue that this is not acceptable when consumers and regulators are being asked to trust life-critical software. For Tesla investors, this political pressure matters in several ways. First, if the NHTSA responds by tightening reporting requirements, Tesla could be forced to disclose more granular data on miles driven under autopilot, under full self-driving, and under manual control. That could either validate Tesla's safety claims or expose larger gaps than the company has acknowledged publicly. Second, more stringent reporting rules could slow down Tesla's deployment plans or increase compliance costs, especially if they are applied retroactively or combined with further safety investigations or recalls. The Kansas City report also emphasizes that the entire case for putting more autonomous vehicles on public roads rests on the promise that they are safer than human drivers. If Tesla or any other automaker is overstating its safety record, there is a risk that consumers are choosing to buy or use these systems under a false sense of security. From an investor perspective, that translates directly into reputational risk, legal risk, and potentially higher insurance and warranty costs in the future. It also highlights the competitive risk. If regulators and the public end up viewing Waymo-style driverless services as clearly safer and better documented than Tesla's supervised system, capital and partnerships may start tilting toward those robotaxi platforms. According to Mashable, the spotlight is also turning to Elon Musk's broader transportation vision through the Boring Company's Vegas Loop. While this project is technically separate from Tesla, it is tightly linked to the brand in the minds of many investors, because the system uses Tesla vehicles, relies on Musk's reputation, and is often showcased as a glimpse of Tesla's transportation future. Mashable reports that the Vegas Loop is now operating 10 stations around Las Vegas, including 2 at Harry Reid International Airport, with more stations planned as the network expands to hotels and potentially a university campus. However, the reality of the project today appears far from the original grand vision of high-speed autonomous pods whisking thousands of riders per hour through underground tunnels. Mashable notes that the tunnel connection to the airport itself is still not open, even though airport loop stations have already begun selling rides. Instead of an underground express route, passengers who book a loop ride from the airport are currently picked up by a human driver in a Tesla and taken along regular surface streets for the 5-mile journey to the convention center, functioning much like a discounted rideshare service rather than a futuristic transit system. Urbanist YouTuber Ray Delahunty, known as City Nerd, documented his experience using the Vegas Loop in a recent video cited by Mashable. He described confusion about where to find the stations, minimal signage in casinos and at the airport, and limited amenities at the stations themselves. Some escalators were not working, seating was sparse, and many riders appeared unsure of how to request cars through the app. At the Fontainebleau station, Tesla simply left the tunnel and mixed back into regular parking garage traffic, making the system feel less like a dedicated transit network and more like an elaborate private driveway for a ride-hailing fleet. For Tesla enthusiasts, this matters for 2 reasons. First, the loop's current reliance on human drivers in Tesla's emphasizes that Musk's broader mobility ecosystem is not yet fully autonomous, even in a tightly controlled and relatively simple environment. The gap between the Boring Company's marketing of a high-capacity, high-speed underground network and on-the-ground experience of low ridership and modest throughput raises questions about how quickly these concepts can scale to other cities. Second, the Vegas Loop struggles with wayfinding and user experience suggest that even with sleek vehicles and tunnels, real-world transit success requires mundane, operational excellence, clear signs, reliable escalators, robust apps, and customer support. Mashable reports that the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority funded the initial loop project at a cost of around $47 to $52 million, plus several million dollars per year in maintenance, using hotel room taxes. Future tunnels are expected to be funded by the Boring Company, while individual stations are paid for by casinos and the airport. The long-term vision advertises up to 90,000 passengers per hour across dozens of miles of tunnels, but current traffic is closer to 1 million riders per year, which translates to only a bit over 100 riders per hour on average. For investors following Tesla's ecosystem, the key takeaway is that ambitious mobility projects attached to Musk's name can take longer to mature than initial presentations suggest. That does not necessarily mean they will fail, but it does suggest that valuation expectations for Musk-related transportation ideas, including Tesla robotaxis, should account for potential delays, real-world friction, and user experience challenges. According to the Economic Times, citing a Wall Street Journal report, the Boring Company is seeking to raise a significant new funding round at a sharply higher valuation. The article says Elon Musk's tunneling startup is in talks to raise about $4 billion in fresh capital, which would value the company at roughly $20 billion. That would represent a substantial jump from its 2022 valuation of $5.7 billion, established when the company raised around $675 million. The Boring Company was founded with the goal of cutting the cost and time required to dig transportation tunnels, and ultimately to move passenger pods through low-pressure underground tubes. In practice, its main operational project to date is the Vegas Loop in Las Vegas, and it has signed a preliminary agreement to build a 17-kilometer underground high-speed network in Dubai. According to its own website, the company says the Vegas Loop has carried more than 3 million passengers across 8 stations so far, although this figure aggregates all riders and does not break out independent productivity metrics like riders per hour or revenue per station. For Tesla investors, a funding round at a $20 billion valuation sends mixed signals. On the positive side, capital flowing into the Boring Company strengthens the broader Musk ecosystem and can support further development of tunnel technology and station operations that rely heavily on Tesla vehicles. A healthier Boring Company could order more Teslas, showcase more use cases for electric vehicles in urban mobility, and contribute indirectly to Tesla's brand as a technology leader. On the risk side, a richly valued Boring company reinforces the perception that a lot of future growth is already priced into Musk-linked mobility ideas, even though many of them are still early stage or unproven at scale. If the Vegas loop continues to face criticism or fails to meet its aggressive capacity promises, investors might eventually reassess how much of a premium to grant to Musk's visionary infrastructure concepts. That, in turn, could influence market sentiment toward Tesla's own long-term robotaxi and infrastructure narratives. According to the Turkish outlet Haber, Tesla's autonomous ride-hailing network has experienced an unexpected slowdown, which coincides with weaker financial performance and pressure on the company's share price. The report focuses on a notable drop in the total distance driven by Tesla's paid robotaxi fleet during the second quarter of the year. While the article is brief and does not provide detailed mileage statistics, it emphasizes that this decline in robotaxi usage lines up with a quarter in which Tesla reported profit compression and a decline in its stock. From an investor's perspective, a reduction in the miles driven by a paid robotaxi fleet is potentially significant. For a software-driven mobility business, miles are data, and data is the fuel that trains and refines the underlying artificial intelligence. Fewer paid robotaxi miles can mean slower learning, slower improvement of autonomous performance, and a longer runway before the service can safely and confidently scale to new markets. Additionally, fewer paying rides translate directly into lower revenue and weaker evidence that the robotaxi business model is gaining real-world traction. If investors had been counting on rapidly compounding robotaxi utilization to offset pressure in Tesla's core vehicle margins, a sudden drop in usage may force them to revisit growth assumptions, at least in the near term. The Haber report notes that Tesla's management has offered an explanation for this slowdown, but does not give the full detail in the short summary. While we don't have the exact reasoning from this article alone, there are several plausible categories of causes: temporary regulatory constraints in key pilot regions, software rollouts that limited availability, changes in pricing or service areas, or a strategic shift to prioritize safety over aggressive mileage growth. Regardless of the underlying reason, the immediate takeaway for investors is that execution in Tesla's autonomous network is not moving in a straight line, and that quarterly volatility in usage metrics is a real possibility. Finally, according to the Herfelder Zeitung in Germany, Elon Musk has made rare public comments reflecting on his high-profile political role in the former Trump administration, which could have indirect implications for Tesla's brand and regulatory environment. In an interview with The Economist, Musk discussed his short tenure as head of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, a position he held from January to May 2025. During that period, he oversaw deep cuts across parts of the U.S. federal bureaucracy, including controversial reductions and restructuring at the U.S. Agency for International Development, known as USAID, and significant trimming of federal employment. Musk admitted that he may have been drawn too deeply into politics, saying he had let himself get carried away. However, he simultaneously defended the overall direction of the cuts, continuing to describe USAID as a politically driven organization and downplaying claims that the sudden withdrawal of U.S. funding had cost lives. He argued that allegations of humanitarian harm were exaggerated, and he criticized large philanthropic organizations like the Gates Foundation and Mackenzie Scott's Yield Giving for not filling any funding gaps. The Herfelder Zeitung article contrasts Musk's statements with independent research, including a Lancet analysis estimating that USAID health programs had saved tens of millions of lives over 2 decades, and press reports suggesting that the abrupt funding cuts may have led to hundreds of thousands of preventable deaths, especially among children in poorer countries. The article also details that more than 270,000 federal employees left their jobs amid the DOGE reforms, with many departures occurring through a delayed layoff program, and that the agency was ultimately shut down amid lawsuits accusing it of unconstitutional and politically motivated actions. Beyond the numbers, the article notes that Musk continues to use strong political rhetoric, expressing support for right-wing parties in Europe and framing their voters as ordinary people who want secure cities, controlled borders, and responsible budgeting. When asked about accusations of anti-Muslim sentiment, he sidestepped the label and instead said he opposed crimes like rape and murder and any attempts to impose legal rules that conflict with what he called Western norms. For Tesla shareholders and fans, Musk's continued political activism carries both upside and risk. On the upside, his outspoken style and willingness to challenge institutions attract a dedicated following, drive enormous media attention, and keep his companies including Tesla at the center of public debate. That visibility can translate into marketing reach, recruitment advantages, and a loyal customer base that identifies with Musk's narrative of disruption. On the risk side, Highly polarizing political positions can alienate regulators, large institutional investors, and portions of the consumer market in the US and abroad. When Musk's comments are perceived as dismissive of global development programs or closely aligned with nationalist movements, some governments, cities, or large companies may hesitate to partner with Tesla on fleet contracts, charging infrastructure, or regulatory pilots. This is particularly relevant as Tesla seeks approvals for autonomous fleets, energy storage projects, and new factories worldwide, all of which depend heavily on political goodwill. Meanwhile, the same Herfelder Zeitung article notes that SpaceX's recent initial public offering has seen its share price drop more than a quarter from last month's levels. Even though SpaceX is a separate company, investor sentiment about Musk's empire tends to move somewhat in tandem. If markets begin to question the sustainability of Musk's multi-company leadership load, or if political controversies weigh on one brand, they can spill into perceptions of Tesla's governance and long-term focus. Putting these stories together, Tesla investors and enthusiasts are facing a complex landscape. On one side, a maturing autonomous driving ecosystem is taking shape, with Waymo setting a benchmark for regulated, data-rich safety claims and policymakers pushing for more rigorous reporting of crash and mileage data from all players, particularly Tesla. On another side, Musk's broader mobility and infrastructure ambitions, from the Vegas loop to the Boring Company's planned expansion and sought-after funding, show both the promise and the friction of turning bold visions into functioning, scalable systems. At the same time, Tesla's own robotaxi network appears to be experiencing uneven growth, at least in the short term, with a reported drop in paid miles coinciding with earnings pressure and a softer stock price. Layered onto that is the persistent uncertainty created by Musk's personal political trajectory and the reactions it provokes among regulators, media, and key stakeholders. For long-term Tesla followers, these developments highlight that the company's future is no longer just about building and selling electric vehicles. It is about competing credibly in autonomous safety benchmarks, navigating shifting regulatory expectations, integrating with new forms of urban infrastructure, and managing brand risk in an era where the CEO's personal platform shapes perceptions as much as the product roadmap does. Thanks for listening to Tesla Daily News. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing so you don't miss the latest updates.